She didn't sleep that night or the night after that. She hadn't slept more than a few hours at a stretch in years. But she never told anyone. She was the one people came to when things fell apart. She was the one who ran towards the smoke. She was the one who sat with people in the worst moments of their lives and said, I've got you. She didn't know who was supposed to say that to her. Welcome to the Superhuman Resilience Project. I'm Kara. This is Season 1, Episode 9, and it's our final episode of a month that has meant a lot to me. March, we celebrate International Women's Month. This podcast exists because of people who give more than most people can fathom. Veterans who carry entire wars inside them. First responders who hold the worst of humanity in their hands on a Tuesday afternoon and then go pick their kids up from school. Law enforcement officers who stand in the space between chaos and order day after day and still find a way to choose service. This podcast exists because those people are real and they deserve to be seen. Today we close out this month by honoring 3 of them. 3 women, 1 from the military, 1 from the fire service, and 1 from law enforcement. Their stories are different. Their pain has different names. But what runs through all 3 of them, what makes them superhuman, is the same force. They kept giving. Even when they were breaking, even when no one was watching, even when every logical reason said to stop, they kept giving. I want you to sit with that for a second before we begin. Think about someone in your life like that. Maybe it's someone you know. Maybe it's you. This is for them. Before we meet these 3 women, I want to take a moment because I think context here matters too. When we talk about trauma in service professions, we often talk about it in abstract. We use clinical words: PTSD, moral injury, secondary traumatic stress. And those words are important. They're real and they have weight. But today I want to talk to you about what those words look like in a human body and in a human life. Because here's what most people don't know. Women in service fields, fire, military, law enforcement, face a double burden. They carry the same operational trauma as their male counterparts, the same images they can't unsee, the same sounds that live in their nervous systems long after a call is over, the same grief of losing colleagues, losing civilians they tried to save, losing pieces of themselves. And on top of that, they navigate institutions that weren't always built for them, that sometimes told them explicitly or implicitly that showing strain was weakness, that asking for help was failure, that being a woman in these spaces meant you had to work twice as hard to earn the right to the same suffering. I say this not to focus on victimhood. I say it because understanding the weight someone carries is the only way you truly understand the miracle of watching them keep going. The women we're about to talk about are not victims. They are warriors of a different kind. There are women who looked at everything stacked against them and said, consciously or not today. So let's see them. Maria, U.S. Army combat veteran, 2 tours. Maria grew up in a small town in Texas where 3 things were non negotiable: God, family, and service. Her father had served, her grandfather had served. When she enlisted at 19, it felt less like a choice and more like a sentence in the story that had already been written for her. And she was good at it. Exceptional, actually. She had a gift for reading a room, for reading people, and knowing when something felt off before anyone else could articulate it. Her commanding officers noticed early. She was moved into roles that required intuition. And that intuition, the very thing that made her good at her job, it came at a price. Her first deployment to Iraq, she was 22 years old. I'm not going to describe in detail what she saw because the details aren't the point. The point is that she saw things no human being should see. And she did her job anyway. She showed up every day, clear eyed, focused, steady, because people were counting on her. She came home after that first tour and did what a lot of veterans do. She smiled and said she was fine. She went to family dinners. She watched football. She laid awake at 3 in the morning with her heart slamming in her chest like it was trying to get out. But she didn't tell anyone because she didn't want to worry them. She volunteered for a second tour. I thought if I went back, she said years later, I could fix something. I could balance something out. Like there was a ledger somewhere and I owed more. The second tour was harder. She lost 2 members of her unit. She won't say their names in public. She says their names are too precious for that. But she carries them. Every day she carries them. She came home from the second tour at 26 years old and didn't leave her apartment for 3 weeks. This is a part of the story that doesn't make it to the parades. The part that happens in apartments, in parking lots where you're suddenly pulled over because you couldn't breathe, in grocery stores where a simple sound, sends you somewhere else entirely. Maria was experiencing severe PTSD. Hypervigilance so acute that she couldn't sit with her back to a room. Nightmares that weren't dreams so much as exact replicas. She would wake up not knowing what year it is or where she was. She was ashamed. She was ashamed because she had been trained to be resilient. She was ashamed because she had seen others handle it better, or so she thought. She was ashamed because she was a woman and some part of her had absorbed the message somewhere along the way that women in service had to be more fine than anyone else. She started drinking, not to get drunk, but to get quiet, to make her nervous system stop screaming. And then one afternoon, sitting in her apartment, she called her mother. She didn't mean to. Her fingers just dialed. And when her mother answered, Maria opened her mouth, and for the first time in 4 years, she told the truth. That phone call saved her life. Not immediately, not cleanly. The road after that was long and hard and nonlinear. Therapy, VA programs, stumbling, getting back up. Medication that helped, therapy that helped more. A support group of other women veterans who understood in a way no one else could. But here's where Maria's story becomes extraordinary. 5 years after that phone call, Maria became a peer support specialist at a veterans center. She sits with people who are where she was. She doesn't give them speeches. She doesn't hand them pamphlets. She sits with them. She said, I was there. I know what the ledger feels like. I know what 3 in the morning feels like. And I'm still here. She runs a women's veterans support group that has helped dozens of women who, like her, believed for too long that asking for help was a betrayal of who they were. She kept giving. Even when she was broken, she found a way to give differently, more honestly, more wisely. But she kept giving. The lesson Maria teaches us is one of the hardest lessons in resilience, that getting help is not the opposite of strength. It is strength. It is the most honest form of strength. The kind that says, I'm going to face what's real inside me, and I'm going to do the work because the people I want to serve deserve a version of me that has done the work. She didn't stop being a soldier. She just learned what the real battlefield looked like. Let's talk about Danny, structural firefighter and EMT, 18-year veteran. Danny wanted to be a firefighter since she was 7 years old. She doesn't have a complicated origin story about it. She just knew it. She liked the idea of running towards things. She liked the idea that there were people who did that, who made their whole life about running towards the things that other people ran away from. She made it into the academy at 24 after being told more than once that it wasn't suited for her, that she was too small, that the job was going to beat her up. She ignored every single one of those people. She trained harder than anyone in her class, and she graduated near the top. And the job did beat her up. Not in the way that they had warned her. The physical demands she handled. She had been stronger than she looked, and she could carry her weight and then some. She could enter a burning structure and stay focused when everything in her body was screaming to leave. She could do the job. What no one prepared her for was the accumulation. Firefighters, especially those cross-trained as EMTs and paramedics, as Danny was, don't just fight fires. They work car accidents. They work overdoses. They work pediatric calls. They work scenes where people don't make it. And where sometimes the reason they don't make it is something Danny will carry for the rest. There's a term in psychology called cumulative trauma. It means that it's not always one single catastrophic event that breaks a person. Sometimes it's the weight of 1,000 smaller events, each one adding a layer, building and building until one day the weight is more than any architecture was meant to hold. For Danny, the weight built slowly. She didn't notice it at first. She was good at compartmentalizing and leaving the job as a job. She was funny and outgoing and the kind of person who could walk into a room and light it up. Her crew adored her. She ran calls, she came home, she cooked dinner, she coached her daughter's soccer team on the weekends. And then year 12 happened. In year 12, on a Tuesday in November, she worked a call that she cannot talk about in full. What she will say is that it involved a child. What she will say is that they did everything right and it didn't matter. What she will say is that she drove home that night in silence. And when her daughter, who was 8 years old and full of light, ran to the door and hugged her, Danny stood in the hallway and felt nothing. Not sadness, not relief, nothing. That frightened her more than anything that had ever happened on a call. What Danny was experiencing is called emotional numbing. It's one of the signatures of secondary traumatic stress. The nervous system's way of self protecting when it has processed too much grief. The brain essentially says, I cannot keep feeling this. I'm going to turn down the volume. The problem is, it turns down all of the volume. Not just the pain, but the joy, too. The love, the aliveness. Danny spent the better part of a year operating in that gray fog. She went through the motions. She was technically present, but she describes herself during that time as a ghost, moving through her own life without touching any of it. What reached her was unexpected. Her department had brought in a new peer support program, mandatory check ins, not with department psychologists, but with fellow firefighters who had been through their own struggles and had been trained as peer counselors. Firefighters talking to firefighters. Danny was skeptical. She showed up because she had to. She sat in that first session with her arms crossed, ready to be underwhelmed. The peer counselor, a man who'd been in the service for 25 years, looked at her and said, very simply, I went gray for 2 years. I am telling you, it comes back. She cried for the first time in over a year. The color did come back, slowly, with support, with therapy, with the courage to be honest with her crew about where she had been, which, she discovered, prompted 3 other people on her shift to quietly admit that they recognized exactly what she was describing. Danny today is one of the most passionate advocates for mental health support in the fire service in her region. She helped push her department to formalize and expand its peer support program. She speaks at conferences about cumulative trauma. She's mentored a generation of younger firefighters, women especially. And her message is always the same. The bravest thing I did in 18 years on the job was not the fire calls. The bravest thing I did was sit in that room and tell the truth. She still runs calls. She still shows up. She still runs toward the thing everyone else runs away from. But now she runs toward a different kind of fire, too. The one inside the people she serves alongside. Danny's lesson is about the lie of invincibility. The story we tell ourselves and each other that the strong ones don't need help. That story costs lives. Not just the lives lost in the field, but in the slower losses, the marriages that crumble, the parents who are present in body but not in spirit, the people who leave the job because the job broke them, but because they were never allowed to heal along the way. Resilience is not an absence of damage. Resilience is the willingness to be repaired and to let others be repaired too. Let's talk about Renee, 22-year police veteran, detective, and CISM peer support. Renee will tell you she became a cop because she was tired of things being unfair. She grew up in a neighborhood where fairness was not guaranteed, where the people who were supposed to protect you sometimes didn't, and where she watched her community absorb that reality with a kind of exhausted grace that she found both heartbreaking and inspiring. She wanted to be different. She wanted to be the kind of officer that she didn't always see. She put herself through school. She graduated at the top of her academy class, and she hit the streets at 23 with a sense of purpose that felt like she could carry anything. It couldn't carry her through everything, but it carried her a very long way. For the first decade, she was exactly the kind of officer she had set out to be. She was rigorous, she was fair, she was present in the communities she served, and in a way that built genuine trust. People knew her by name, not just the way that signals trouble, but in the way that signals relationship. She worked her way into the detectives unit. She specialized in crimes against persons. She was, by any measure, exceptional. The weight of exceptional in that unit is almost impossible to describe to someone who hasn't been inside of it. Crimes against persons. Think about what that means. That means every case that Renee worked on was a human being at the absolute worst moment of their existence. Every file on her desk was a name. Every name was a story of a violation. And it was her job day after day to sit in those stories and to know them intimately, to carry them through the system and to fight for them while the world kept spinning normally outside her window. Law enforcement officers experience something called vicarious trauma at extremely high rates, particularly those working in units like Renee's. You absorb the trauma of others. You carry their pain through the process. And the process is often slow, often unfair, often re traumatizing. On top of that, Renee navigated being a woman in a unit where women were still, in year 15 of her career, a distinct minority. She was respected and she had earned that. But she also operated in a culture where emotional expression was equated with weakness, where the appropriate response to anything was to shrug it off and to go back to work. And she was very good at shrugging it off until year 17, when she worked a case that stayed inside her like a splinter she couldn't reach. She won't detail it. What she will say is the outcome was not what it should have been. She will say that justice, the thing she had built her entire career on the belief in, felt in that case like a word that meant something different in books than it did in real life. She finished that case and submitted paperwork for a transfer. She was going to leave the detectives. She was going somewhere quieter. She was done. What stopped her was a conversation with a patrol officer, a young woman, 2 years in on the job, who knocked on her office door one afternoon and said, "Detective, I don't know who else to ask. Something happened on a call last week and I can't stop thinking about it. And I don't want my sergeant to think I can't handle it." Renee looked at that young woman and saw herself 20 years earlier. She pulled up a chair. She canceled her transfer. Over the following year, she pursued training in critical incident stress management, CISM, and became a certified peer support officer for her department. She built a program from near scratch that trained other officers to provide peer support to colleagues in crisis. She advocated loudly and persistently for departmental policies that normalize mental health support, not as something you do when you're broken, but as something you do routinely, the way you service your gear. She faced resistance. Of course she did. There was always resistance when you try to change a culture that has survived on silence. People told her she was soft. People questioned whether someone who was admittedly struggling had any business running a support program. She heard it all, and she kept going. I decided, Renee would say, that the case that almost broke me was going to mean something. That young woman in my office was going to be the reason it meant something. And then the next person and the next. I couldn't fix the outcome of the case, but I could change what happened to the people carrying cases like this. Today, the program Renee built has expanded beyond her own department. Officers from neighboring agencies train with her team. She speaks at the academy to cadets. She looks them, these young faces full of the exact same fire she once had, and she tells them the truth, that this job will test them in ways that have nothing to do with physical bravery. That the hardest thing they will ever be asked to do is feel something difficult and still choose to stay in the room. You are allowed to be human, she tells them. In fact, the most important qualification for this job is staying human, protecting your humanity in the same way you protect everything else. Renee's lesson is about purpose as medicine, about the moment when your own wound becomes the reason you turn towards someone else's. It's a hard alchemy to take what hurt you and to transmute it into something that heals others. But it's one of the most powerful acts human beings can perform. She kept giving, not despite her pain, but through it. Maria, Danny, Renee. 3 women, 3 fields, 3 different shapes of pain. And each of them, the same refusal to let that pain be the end of their story. Here's what I want you to take from them. Not a 5-step plan, not a list of strategies, but something simpler and harder than that. They asked for help. Every one of them. At the moment that mattered, stopped performing strength and started living it. And living strength, real strength, looks like a phone call to your mother at your lowest point. It looks like crying in front of your peer counselor. It looks like a detective canceling her escape plan because a young officer needed a chair pulled up. They redefined what giving meant. Each of them had to break apart one version of service to find a deeper one. Maria stopped serving from a place of debt and started serving from a place of earned wisdom. Danny stopped being fireproof and started being real. Renee stopped running from the case that hurt her and started running towards everyone that represented it. And none of them stopped. None of them. Through the worst of it, they found reasons to stay. Reasons that weren't always grand or articulate. Sometimes the reason was just a young woman at the door. Sometimes it was just a phone call. Sometimes it was just setting up one more time. That's the thread. The extraordinary, ordinary act of getting up one more time. This is our 9th episode. The last one of the month that has asked so much of me in the best possible way. I started this podcast because I believe that resilience was the most underreported story of our time. That there are people among us, in uniform and out of it, who are doing things every day that deserve to be spoken about with reverence. Not just on holidays, not just in memorial speeches, but every single day. The women we talked about today are not the exceptions, they are the examples. They are proof of what becomes possible when someone is given or fights their way to the support, the permission, and the truth that they needed. And that's where I want to leave you. This March, the month of women. If you know a woman in service, any service, tell her. Not just that she's brave. Tell her that you see the weight she carries. Tell her that asking for help is the bravest thing she'll ever do. And tell her that the world needs her to be whole, not gutted, not hollow, whole. And if you are that woman, if you are the one who hasn't slept, who's kept running towards everything, who hasn't let anyone pull up a chair for you, this episode is for you. This entire month is for you. You are allowed to be human. You are allowed to heal. And you are allowed to keep giving, not from the bottom of an empty well, but from something real and replenished and hard won. Sponsors for our show include W Energy. W Energy tubs give you zero sugar energy drinks that keep you ready to show up without the artificial dyes and the colors. Clean energy, no crash. I also want to thank our sponsor, Deemed Fit, active wear for first responders, by first responders who understand what your grit needs from your clothing. You can find out more about our sponsors on our website, renewedperspectives.me/podcast. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for caring about these stories. I'm Kara. This is the Superhuman Resilience Project. We'll be back next week. Until then, keep going and let someone help you do it.